I wrote a book called Explanations and Corrections in the Gospel of Luke. I copyrighted it this year, 2021. And I'm going to read part of uh, a chapter called Luke Reviewed and Altered Passages in Mark and Matthew. And I said in that chapter, I explain numerous departures from Mark and Matthew in this book. I will first mention some that commentators have frequently written about. I will begin with the discrepancy commonly discussed in commentaries. Luke knew that Matthew 17:1 and Mark 9:2 said after 6 days, but Luke 9:28 reads about 8 days after. Commentaries usually harmonize the three Gospels, like Adam Clarke did in his comment on Matthew 17:1. And this is an old public domain commentary. Mark 9:2 has the same number, but Luke says in 9:28 after 8 days. The reason for this difference seems to be the following. Matthew and Mark reckon the days from that day mentioned in the preceding chapter to that day mentioned in this. Luke includes both days, as well as the 6 intermediate. Hence, the one evangelist makes 8, the other 6, without any contradiction. Like many other commentators, Clarke was saying that Mark and Matthew only counted the 6 complete intervening days, but that Luke counted 2 partial days, the partial days being the day of Peter's confession when the period began, and also the day of the transfiguration when the period ended. Clarke, like me, believed that Luke used Matthew and Mark as models for his gospel. Why did Luke change an established reading that had nothing wrong with it? Since according to Clarke, Luke modeled his gospel on Matthew and Mark, didn't his readers think that he was contradicting those gospels? Here are some scriptures that give insight on the evangelist's phraseology. Mark wrote that the Son of Man would rise after 3 days, and Mark 8:31, 9:31, and 10:34, consistently using the Greek preposition meta, which is translated after in the American Standard Version, which is public domain, and also frequently translated that way in other versions. The phrase after 6 days in Mark 9:2 uses the same preposition. So the phrase is the same, different only in the number of days. Luke changed after 3 days to the 3rd day in Luke 18:33 and Luke 24:7. So why didn't Luke change after 6 days and Mark 9:2 to the 6th day instead of to about 8 days after? And I'll interject that in the book I go with the belief and assumption that Mark and Matthew were written before Luke, and that Luke had them before his eyes when he wrote his revised gospel. So I'm assuming that Luke is correct in this instance and in every other instance in the book. Luke probably didn't think that Mark and Matthew were wrong when they said after 3 days. They probably really meant on the 3rd day. He recognized the phrase as an idiom, a non-literal expression, synonymous with on the 3rd day. Some commentators have pointed out that the Pharisees asked Pilate to guard Jesus' sepulchre until the 3rd day in Matthew 27:64. The Pharisees used the adjective for third because they knew that that is what Jesus had meant. That Greek adjective is the same one used in Luke 24:7, 21, and 46. This explanation is convincing. That is probably the meaning that Mark 8:31, 9:31, and 10:34 were intended to convey. But applying these facts to the passages under discussion shows that Luke did not accept Mark 9:2. Luke wrote about 8 days after, which deliberately contradicts Mark and Matthew. If Luke had written on the sixth day, there would have been no contradiction. And I copied these scriptures on another file to review and make it maybe simpler. So the original passages are in Matthew 17:1 and Mark 9:2. You see in yellow highlight, they say after 6 days. In Luke 9:28, you see in the highlight, it says about 8 days after these sayings. He took with him Peter and John and James and went up into the mountain to pray. But I say in my chapter that we need to pay attention to the use of grammar in Mark's gospel. In Mark 8:31, he says, and he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. Notice there's that Greek preposition meta, meaning after. And it's the same one that was used in Mark 9:2 when it said after 6 days. And Mark 9:31 also says after 3 days, and Mark 10:34. But Luke, when talking about the same things, about the length of time Jesus was going to be entombed, he switches to an ordinal number. Luke 18:33 says, and they shall scourge and kill him, and the third day he shall rise again. If he rose on the third day, he was in the tomb for 2 days plus parts of the third day. But according to Mark, if we understand it literally, he was in the tomb 3 full days. After 3 days, probably plus some more time. And Luke did not use that preposition meta. He used a different grammatical structure. And in the chapter, reference was made to Matthew 27:64, which says, command therefore that the sepulchre be made sure until the third day, lest haply his disciples come and steal him away, and say unto the people, he is risen from the dead, and the last error will be worse than the first. Well, if Jesus was in the sepulchre for 3 full days, and you were sending guards to make sure the disciples didn't steal him, you wouldn't send him until the third day, because the disciples would come after the guards left on the third day and steal the body. But the point here is that Jesus was in the sepulchre for 2 days plus some amount, and that's why the guards were supposed to go there until the third day. That was the original understanding. And so most likely when Mark says after 3 days, he means it as an idiomatic expression that people understood him to mean on the third day, which is how Luke translated it. So I'm not counting those scriptures as errors that were corrected by Luke. If Mark really meant after 3 days, then that's another correction by Luke because he called it the third day. I'm accepting that those are idiomatic expressions, but they don't resolve the problem in Mark 9:2. Because if after 3 days means on the third day, then Luke should have translated Mark 9:2 or rewritten it on the 6th day. But he wrote, and it came to pass about 8 days after these sayings, etc.